Hello, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another episode of Head First with Dr. Hill. Today's guest is Mark Devine, a human performance specialist and also the author of Unbeatable Mind and The Way of the Seal. I think you have a few other things going on. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Dr. Hill. Pleasure.
So, Mark grew up from the San Diego area. For those of us who don't know your rather eclectic and long history, can you give us a sense of what it is you're doing and how you've come to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me here. Yeah, so I am a trainer and a performance coach.
Okay.
Generally speaking, I'm also an entrepreneur. I've started 6 different businesses, and I'm a retired Navy SEAL, 20-year career. I retired as a commander in 2011. So I'm a leader and a trainer of SEALs and special operators. And intriguingly, before my Navy SEAL career, I was a CPA. So
really?
It is somewhat eclectic background.
Yeah.
When you think of that. Yeah.
So really hardcore mental effort and really hardcore physical.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, being a SEAL is very physical.
Quite mental.
Or mental,
too.
yeah.
Interestingly, maybe it'd be informative to go back and explain kind of why I got into SEALs and what happened. So I kind of started my own developmental path in athletics, like most of most listeners here are athletes, and there is obviously a physical mental transfer in the athletic domain, right? So you're training your mind through discipline and through I was a competitive swimmer, so there was some breath work there and a lot of concentration work, and so obviously the spillover and the neuroplastic effect of exercise is now well understood. Of course, in the 70s and 80s, it was just experienced subjectively.
Sure, yeah.
And at any rate, but I when I went down to New York to NYU to get my MBA and working with Arthur Anderson at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, working full time and getting my CPA, studying and passing that exam. I also got involved in a martial art.
Okay.
And it was
which one?
It was called Seido Karate. Seido.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've heard of that from the East Coast.
So Seido was founded by Grandmaster Tadashi Nakamura, who was brought to the United States by Masayama, who was the founder of Kyokunshin, which is a pretty intense, kind of tournament fighting and system. And Nakamura was more into the developmental aspect, the karate do part, which was, the karate could be used to develop, a complete human being, one who's got a strong value set, who could be a leader, and that it was for women. He had a program for blind and disadvantaged kids. He had a program for free, which was nonprofit for those who can afford it. And then there were guys like me who were like really into the karate hardcore aspect, but we didn't necessarily need to go to tournaments and fight. I wasn't in it for that. I was in it for the developmental, aspect of becoming a better person. That was fascinating because he understood the power of combining Zen, concentration training, concentration meditation with the movement. Okay, so that was very formative for me.
Okay.
And so through 4 years getting my Shodan, I did practically as much meditation as I did fighting, as the hardcore work. Yeah. So he combined the yin and the yang, inner and the outer. Anyway, so during this period, I also kind of, because of a lot of time sitting on the bench, I had the epiphany or the awakening that the CPA path was not for me. I finished it, though. I finished CPA, finished my MBA.
Great.
The same month that I got those degrees and that certificate, I was on the train to Officer Candidate School because I had decided that I wasn't meant for that career path. I was meant to be a warrior and a leader, in an intense.
And you were in the Navy at the time?
No.
Oh, throughout you. So you enrolled in.
I got an offer through Officer Candidate School. I was one of 2 people selected that year to go to Officer Candidate School with a guarantee to go through SEAL training afterwards. Wow. So, anyways, why this is interesting is so I go to OCS. I blaze through that. I go to BUDS. When I show up at BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. There's 185 people there. And, there was something a little bit different by the way I was navigating myself day in and day out. I couldn't quite put my finger on it right away. But it started being aware of it as people were just quitting at things that I thought were rather mundane. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, we're doing a 3-mile ocean swim and it's bitter cold, but yeah, so what? It's going to be over, right?
Right.
And just kick, stroke, and glide. And I was doing all the things I learned in Zen and all the things I learned in competitive swimming. And, that event's over, and then, what's the next thing? Okay, gear up for that, prepare for it, just get through it. Then what's so I was able to chunk the process down in these really small tasks, and I was able to control my mind and my emotions because of the training that I had sitting on the bench and through the martial arts. And through that 9-month or 6 months buds and then SQT, in my buds class, of those 185, 19 of us graduated.
Oh, wow.
And I graduated as the honor man or number one grad in my class.
Wow.
And it was because of all that formative training I had.
So you bring equanimity into physical training, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day was just treated like a, just another challenge. And I also knew the bud instructors were there to try to probe and, poke for weaknesses, and that if you let them in, then you lose, right? And so it required a significant amount of mental emotional control that, is considered unordinary today even. But for those of us who had trained in the martial art with that Zen focus, it was actually quite ordinary, because that's what that training does. It trains mental and emotional control.
Interesting.
Anyway, so that was a long time ago, because that was in 1990, but that stuck with me. Obviously, such a formative event. It changed, you can imagine all the neuroplasticity effects that's going on when you go through SEAL training. Every day you're doing something really challenging, really new. You've never done it before, and you got to master it really quickly. Jumping, swimming, diving, shooting, running, leading, everything extremely uncomfortable. And so the accelerant effect on your brain's capacity to the complexity and to recognize patterns was amazing. So I came out of that a different person. And the 1 week in there that was like really amazing was the Hell Week, right?
Okay.
So Hell Week is 140 hours, it's 6 days straight of training, nonstop, around the clock, no sleep.
Oh my goodness.
Right? And so you're dealing with sleep deprivation, you're dealing with exhaustion.
A few days in, things must get weird.
Yeah, it gets really interesting. And what I found during Hell Week was the power of the mind to start to take over. So if you think of, just traditional wisdom would be that, as you get more and more overtired, that your body's going to start breaking down and you're going to start, just making really dumb mistakes.
Sure.
And that is true, you do. So the SEALs understand that, okay, in order for this to make sense, we've got to have the tasks that they're performing be fairly simple. Like row this boat around Coronado Island for 16 miles. Okay, fairly simple tasks. Just do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stroke, stroke, stroke. But a lot of weird things happen during those 16 miles, a lot of hallucinations and a lot of weird things. So it's a matter, can you control yourself to get through that task?
Yep.
And what I found was after day 3, most of my class was quitting, by that time. So by the time we got to Hell Week, which was week 7 for us, I think we went from 185 down to like 80 or 90. And then by the time we got to day 3 of Hell Week, we were down to like 40 people.
Wow. Really separating the wheat from the chaff, so
exactly,
to speak. Yeah.
At any rate, what was interesting about that one segment of training was that I started to feel myself get stronger by the 3rd day, and then I started to actually put muscle mass on my body by day 4.
Instead of decompensating mentally and physically like many people were.
Instead of degrading and decompensating, because I was able to keep energy flowing and keep breathing and stay focused. And even though, I experienced sleep deprivation just like everyone else, there was something going on because of the way I'd trained that I was able to convince my mind that this was a new normal and that, hey, it's all good.
Yeah.
And we're going to we're going to get stronger. We're going to make it through this. And my body responded. One of our sayings at SEALFIT is where your mind leads, your body will follow.
Yeah.
And it's actually the flip side of that is true, because if where your body leads, your mind will follow when it's untrained. And so if you get an injury and your mind starts to focus on the injury, then you go weak. Kinesthetics tells us that we'll go weak because now we're thinking about something negative. We're thinking, energetically sending signals of weakness and of degradation, right? So you can overcompensate or counter that by interrupting that. And this, so pain management, pain science has already proved this, right? If you don't focus on the pain, you focus on something else, eventually the pain goes away because it's just a neurological signal.
Sure.
Right? Or a chemical signal. Anyways, I went quite long in that. But that experience as being a SEAL combined with being a martial artist, and then later on I got into yoga, starting with Ashtanga yoga.
Great. I'm a big fan of that.
I know. Terrific practice. And Ashtanga was created taught to Patabi Joyce, who was the guy who brought it to America, for athletes and warriors.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
It was taught to him by Krishnamacharya, and it was taught in a very specific way. That's why Ashtanga is very militant-like. Even, keeping your feet together and standing at attention. Yep. That was to teach young athletes and young warriors, right? And it's a very aggressive, almost martial artist-like yoga practice.
Yeah, it can be, certainly, yeah.
Can be intense. anyways, so I enjoyed the physical aspect of yoga, but then once I really understood the full scope, as it was taught, by Patanjali and, the ancient yogis around mental development as a science of mental development and integration, then that was opened me up to a whole new world as well. And so I've been able to kind of integrate the best techniques for developing the mind, body, and spirit from the martial arts and yoga, combine it with my Navy SEAL experience, which also, had a lot of like hacking tools, and we're always looking for the best and what's the most effective way to shortcut and to get to learning quickly.
So you essentially found as you were going through this ridiculously intense training that something was different, and you had other resources brought in from other training you'd done.
Right.
I assume you've taken those perspectives out now into training other people.
Right. So that was the natural progression for the warrior. First you're the warrior athlete, and then you're the warrior leader, and then the statesman, and then you got to be a teacher.
Yep.
And so I got into teaching in 2007 through SEAL Fit. And that was where I started training SEAL candidates, special operations, Green Berets, even foreign, a lot of Brits and
Allied
Canadians
services,
and Aussie SAS, those types, helping them learn what I knew to be effective to get through their training and to become better warriors, what I call a world-centric warrior. And that's a warrior who's not going to get trapped in limited thinking even in the midst of a firefight or in the midst of a very complex, VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, chaotic and ambiguous, which that term VUCA means. And so I started training them. And then also, interestingly enough, Dr. Hill, I had a lot of entrepreneurs start to come and say, hey, I wasn't able to go down that route, or I chose not to go down that route to be a SEAL, but I'm extremely interested. So I want to test myself. I want to learn what they learn.
Yep.
And it seems like you can teach us that. And so I said, yes, I can. And so it opened it up to entrepreneurs and individuals. So SEAL Fit serves pretty much anyone who wants to come and challenge themselves. It's
for the past decade or so? Is that
10 years. And so it's very physically demanding, though. It's like an integrated training where it's like you got to start with the physical, and then you end even more physical, but all the mental training is layered through that, and it's very team oriented. Anyway, so one thing I will say is that not everyone's ready for that level of physical fitness or physical challenge.
Yeah, I spoke at your Unbeatable conference last year, and I was invited to come down early for the week and do all the workouts, and I looked at the schedule and I was like, oh, I'm busy. Oh well.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
That's a pretty common thing. It's like, I want to get ready for a year before I come to your program.
Exactly. I need to work out hardcore before I can handle the workout vacation.
Right, So I kind of acknowledged that, and so I said, well, I still want to be able to serve, folks who maybe not think that they're ready, even though I might think they're ready, because I know how to scale and bring people through that process. So I wrote Unbeatable Mind and created the Unbeatable Mind program, which is, the annual conference is the one you came to.
Sure.
And so that takes a different approach. So whereas SEAL Fit approach starts with the physical and then ramps it up from there and layers the rest of the work in, Unbeatable Mind starts with the mental.
Okay.
And then it's up to you how you add the physical, or maybe you already have some physical. For some people it's yoga, for some people it's Tai Chi, for some people they're inspired to get off their butt and start a CrossFit program or boot camp of some sort. But that's really on you.
Sure.
I'll give you some guidance on how to fuel and how to move and stuff like that. But I really focus on the mental development, and then the emotional, and then intuitive, and then what I call the kokoro, which is the spiritual side, which is really about grounding yourself in a powerful personal ethos, defining once and for all what your spirit, soul, what your unique offer to the world is.
Yeah. So what sort of things do people do when they come, become an Unbeatable Mind or start engaging with that with you?
Well, it's primarily delivered through an online course, which is self-directed. And then what we do is, and we also have a coaching program. So we've layered on top of that a coaching program where everyone will come meet with us once a month and work with a coach, one of my certified coaches, during the the months in between those 4 periods. And what we do is we layer what we call the 5 mountains, and we have them develop a 5-mountain training plan. And that 5-mountain training plan is to make some movement or improvement on their physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual selves or lines of development or capacities. And there's things that we ask them to do weekly, monthly, quarterly, and then, annually or every 12 to 18 months. And so we kind of develop this whole matrix of what you're going to be able to do, what you're going to do in those 5 mountains, physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, spiritually, every day, once a week, exactly once a quarter. And so the daily might be things like your morning and evening ritual. We have integrated training. The integrated training is going to include things like breath work, concentration, a little bit of movement, integration of movement, breath, and and sound maybe. Reading, obviously, journaling, a lot of the things, but we bring it together in a nice package. And the morning ritual is forward-looking. So we help people begin to take control of time and to look at time differently. So we have everyone focus on the long term and then set the long term aside and then just focus on the day.
Great.
And I learned that from Nakamura. One day, one lifetime. An entire lifetime of learning, entire lifetime of living exists in that day if you're present enough and intentional enough in your actions.
Intention, not momentum.
Right. So the morning routine is, let's connect with our 5 mountains. Let's do something to integrate them and to refine them. Training and practice.
Yep.
But do it in a way that's going to prepare to win the day. So we visualize the day. So that's one of the practices, visualization. We visualize ourselves going through the day. All the key inflection points. Podcast with Dr. Hill. Boom. It's already one in my mind, right? Whatever's next, right? We see those. We see yourself victorious. You see it happening. You've already, as you know from visualization training, you've already experienced it. So once you hit it, then there's a reference point, a neurological and emotional.
Better learning, better incorporation, yeah.
So we have the visualization is forward-looking. The intention is forward-looking. The intention is, what is the one thing I need to do today to get me closer to fulfilling my ethos, which is in alignment with my vision and my purpose in life. If I can accomplish that one thing, then I'm a victorious warrior. You know what I mean? I may end up doing 5 other things, but that one thing is that big thing that's going to move the dial. I'm driving for that, right? Anyway, so that's one example of how we do that. Now, another one is we're very serious about physical training, but we don't look at it as physical training. We look at it as integrated training.
Okay.
So when we go to the CrossFit gym or we do our SealFit workout, or even if you just go to a spin class, we're not doing it because we just want to look good in the bathing suit or we're trying to lose 5 pounds. Those are really, really weak motivators and weak goals. And we also are doing it in a way that's very different than other people. So we're layering in all the skills. I call them, the 4 big ones are breath training, managing your mental dialogue, which is a concentration and a mindfulness practice in and of itself, right? Imagery. What kind of imagery are you going to use? How are you going to use your imaging faculties of your mind while you're doing your training, before, during, and after? And then task orientation. How are you keeping your mind? Remember when I mentioned through buds, I was just focused on one task at a time?
Yeah, chunking these things.
Yeah, so you chunk it down. So every workout, you practice that.
Okay.
So instead of going like, oh my God, I got an hour of, spin. No, you're just going to chunk it down, however you want to break it out, depending upon what you do. For CrossFit, it's like, I'm going to do 5 rounds of these 3 different exercises with this rep scheme. Just focus on one rep scheme at a time.
Yep.
Don't forget, forget about the rounds, forget about everything else. Just one rep scheme at a time. Give yourself a little, victory lap in between. That could be just setting the kettlebell down and doing 3 deep breaths or something like that. You know what I mean? So chunking it down and
change
practicing
the state between those chunks.
Correct. And so now we're integrating, breath, has a mental, emotional, even spiritual training capacity, right? You're managing your internal dialogue, right? So mental focusing and concentration, right? Focusing and concentration. So that's mental training. Shifting where you're using, shifting the region of your brain that's doing the work, right? So shifting from cognitive, analysis to imaging and being able to go back and forth with that.
Like visualization and
like shifting. So
projecting.
I'm gonna project, or I'm gonna reflect, right? And then I'm gonna go back to my neocortex and process.
Sure.
And so being able to be able to move your attention around to different geographic regions of your brain and access very efficiently and effectively those different aspects or different ways that your brain works is very interesting. And then the actual task orientation helps with your fear management and emotional control, because I'm not not allowing the whole totality of this challenge overwhelm me. I've chunked it down to these little tiny bite-sized chunks, which are easily accomplishable.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of the gap being huge, I have these little tiny gaps to step over along the way. And it really helps with momentum.
So this has been informed by your experience of
Right.
being successful through these things, then sort of regularizing the process for other folks that may not have
Right.
had all that foundation going into a extreme thing like this.
Right.
I imagine you're still adding in new things. You're
Sure.
still learning. You're a lifelong
It's a constantly learning process and evolving. Like, we want to use what works, we discard what doesn't, and also one size doesn't fit all. So with our clients, we say, okay, so I might, offer you 25 or 30 different practices. You're not going to do them all,
Sure, yeah.
at the same time. It's just like what I've learned actually with yoga. One of the challenges I have with Ashtangas is you do this one
Right.
sequence until you're ready to move on to the next sequence, and it's one size fits all, or everyone who's willing to take the challenge. But ultimately, Krishnamacharya taught that yoga, just like what I'm trying to teach with Unbeatable Mind, is a personalized practice.
Yep.
And the tools need to be, thoughtfully adapted to your lifestyle, to your body type, to your psychology, to your stage of life, to your goals. And so that's what we teach is that my 5-mountain training plan is going to be very different than yours. It's going to be very different than someone else's. So the tools have to be, thoughtfully adapted. And then how you use them for your morning to win for the day is different than how you're going to use them in the evening ritual, which is going to be to seal that win in, to learn from your mistakes, and to prepare for the sleep cycle.
That's great. So you've had active, high-level performing military and intelligence folks. You've had entrepreneurs. Who else engages with the unbeatable way of doing things? Who are you seeing come through?
I'm really excited to work with young adults. I think there's a huge opportunity with millennials and actually teens. And so I've got some, some partners that I'm working with that we're going to try to bring this training. We are going to bring this training to a younger population. I already have some teachers who use the philosophy and the methods in their schools and whatnot. And through my new Courage Foundation, we're working with disadvantaged populations, troubled populations. This is something that's really mind-boggling. But there are about 10 million adult-age men who are fully capable of work who are out of the workforce right now. And they're not even being counted in the unemployment rolls because they've stopped looking.
Right.
Many of these are former prisoners, former cons.
People have gone from
because they can't get a job.
Right.
They're not hireable by any governmental agency, which is that's wrong.
Half
that
employers,
needs to be changed because that's half the employers. And then of course, most corporate employers are not going to hire.
Yeah, there's a push in California now to remove that checkbox
from
applications that says, "Have you been convicted?
Yeah.
Have you,
It needs to happen. I'm glad California's leading the way because now we got 10 million ex-cons who can't find work, and this is why we have this major opioid addiction.
Sure.
And you're seeing the suicide rate going up for both white and black males of middle age. It's a huge problem. So I want to. We're working with the Prison Fellowship to get Unbeatable Mind into prisons, and then to work with children of prisoners. Now, I don't know how we'll be able to access this group that I'm talking about. So this is more of a generational thing, right?
Sure.
But I'd love to work with also those 10 million, you know what I mean?
Yeah, this reminds me of what Noah Levine did, the Dharma punks or Against the Stream guy. When he discovered meditation, one way that he sort of turned around and brought it back was he started doing mindfulness in the prisons.
Right.
To give people more control over that suffering that they're stuck in. Sounds like you're doing the same thing for that long-term suffering we leave people in after they're discharged from prisons.
Well, that's true, but also, because mindfulness is baked into Unbeatable Mind, you have all the benefits that a meditative practice brings, but also the benefits of accelerated learning. And what we're trying to do is vertical development instead of horizontal. Horizontal development is, I accrue new skills and then I become more skillful. Let's say it's stress management or something like that. Vertical development is not only do I accrue those skills at this stage of development, but I also have skills to elevate myself to a whole nother stage of development where I'm going to see the world in a radically more integrative manner.
Sounds like agency, increased agency is one of the things that will come from that when you start discovering where your weaknesses are, where you have better scaffolding for visioning, progress more than just maintaining your life and whatever it is. Sounds like a degree of agency, a degree of control.
That's one way to look at it. So you're going to have more control over the decisions you make because you're going to understand how the brain works. You're going to be able to avoid all those biases and traps that we're learning a lot about these days. Because our mind is wired to make a lot of mistakes and to jump to conclusions. And this is why a lot of these guys or women too, end up in prisons because of one stupid mistake.
Right.
And those are either emotional or some sort of rutted pattern behavior.
Yep.
And we spend a lot of time in our training at SEAL Fit and Unbeatable Mind helping people expose those patterns and those behaviors and then to eradicate them and to override them with that unbeatable mind process of controlling the mind and emotion, but not in a way like, that word doesn't has a potential negative connotation. Like I'm not doing mind control.
Right.
I'm trying to teach people to take control of unproductive thinking patterns, or even worse, downright negative and destructive patterns. In the case of this population we were just talking about, and then replacing it with a whole new, to use your term, a whole new scaffolding for how to use your thinking processes, but also to expand the capacity for what you perceive as the mind. Right. And so our concept of mind goes well beyond brain. And now research is proving. The heart mind, the belly mind, the biome. We look at the whole body as part of your mind system as well as kind of the ether around it, right? There's an energy transfer when you start to tap into an integrative approach, to use your whole brain plus your whole mind. Well, that requires you start to look at your emotional life because the emotion is part of your mind system, right? It's the felt experience of mind.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and so emotional and mental development, we use some of the same tools. We use breath, we use visualization, we use internal dialogue. Well, think about the feeling state dialogue, right? So we use those tools to try to essentially wire you for more effective mental, emotional, intuitive, and spiritual integration, which then tends to unlock that scaffolding allows a greater capacity, right? So that agency you said, but then it also allows a deeper connection with other humans and connections that expand out. So you move through most, believe it or not, even though it's a relatively early developmental stage, most people, shouldn't say most, but many people still get stuck in somewhere between self-centered and ethnocentric mindsets. And so my football team is the best in my country is the best, and it's a rare individual who can expand beyond that to more of a world-centric. Now, it doesn't mean you don't still love your football team and love your country, but you understand that, hey, this other person has every bit as right to love their football team and love their country and have their views. And so you're able to kind of meet them where they're at and still connect and even, dare I say, love them as a human.
That's that empathetic theory of mind, validation of someone else's perspective kind of stuff. So the word perspective is huge. So part of this training is not only are we expanding the capacity of the mind-body system, horizontally, but we're elevating vertically where you can take greater and greater perspective, more integrated perspectives. It is really incredible to see people experience breakthrough after breakthrough in this training, and I get testimonials practically every week. It's very cool. Very cool. So this is the Unbeatable Mind program.
Mind.
And it sounds like it's, just to recap, a year-long sort of training and coaching program. You have a book. And you also have this, is it a 1 week or is it a longer every year?
We have a coaching program and then we have this annual summit, which is just three and a half days. And we're, contemplating other models. One of my favorite trainings at SEAL Fit was a 3-day leadership academy. And I spent hours and hours and hours. And all the Unbeatable Mind was born out of SEAL Fit. Right. And so it's still in SEAL Fit, but where I'm taking SEAL Fit is to be a little bit more simple model to just train physical, mental toughness, because I find that it's really designed more for warriors and athletes. And so Unbeatable Mind, I'm taking all the real rich 5-mountain integrated stuff out of SEAL Fit and it rests in Unbeatable Mind. But I might bring back, a deep leadership academy.
Sounds like those things are very complementary. Folks could get a lot out of doing both SEAL Fit and the Unbeatable Mind
Yes.
climbing their 5 mountains.
For sure. But like
Yeah.
I said, not everyone wants to do barbell work and the hardcore.
Not everyone can. I mean, with
Not
physical
everyone can,
disability, this is one thing that I tend to really focus on is doesn't really matter where you're at. You can always make a change. Shift
Matters
happens,
where
and
you're
you can
going.
exactly.
Right.
You can always improve capacity, improve goals,
Right.
improve resources. So
Yeah, exactly. And so also with Unbeatable Mind, we'll have the capacity or the structure to experiment with some of the cool things that are coming out of technology. I was talking about the Halo earlier.
Yep.
I want to experience that and test that for the SEAL community. Just an electrostim of your movement
Sure.
area of your mind, right? And stuff like neurofeedback. And if it fits, then I'm okay with a hack as an accelerated developmental tool, but it doesn't replace the training and the practice.
Right. It's such a great point. So I'm involved with neurofeedback, mindfulness, yoga, and nootropics. And I always think nootropics sort of fall into that last category, more palliative, more short-term. And they can mask deficits, but not necessarily change you over time.
Right.
So when folks come in to work with me one-on-one, they always say, they sort of know me as the neurofeedback and nootropic guy. And I tend to tell you, well, let's hold off on the nootropics for a couple of months. Let's see where we can shift your bottlenecks baseline capacity. And once the baseline is obviously different, then you can sort of cosmetically go in and tweak with nootropics and things.
Yeah, and I look at nootropics. I take a product called Qualia.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Daniel Schmussenberger.
Actually, he was here a couple days ago in the studio.
Yeah, so it's probably like the Cadillac or the the Mercedes-Benz of nootropics. At any rate, I just look at it more like like if you've got a highly functioning automobile, like let's say you've got a vintage, Mustang or something like that.
Yep.
You're going to be tweaking it practically every day.
Right.
Right. You're going to constantly be changing oil. You've been constantly, making sure that it's polished up.
Yep.
So to me, the nootropics are kind of a long-term, maintenance program for the mind.
Sure.
It's not gonna. It's not gonna build a new engine for the mind.
Right.
Right.
But
it's gonna help you keep it from degrading because you're keeping all the synapses.
True. Yeah, and all the true nootropics are neuroprotective and have good long-term safety and tend to be anti-aging.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things out there that are labeled nootropics that I think are not, that are more marketing driven.
Well, caffeine would be a nootropic.
Caffeine's not. Even modafinil. I'm not a big fan.
No.
I think it's marketing more than reality that it's nootropic. And I also took it for a while. I had ADHD, and I took it for a couple of weeks and ended up in the hospital with head-to-toe hives as a systemic reaction from modafinil.
Good God.
And with very mild cognitive effects. Turns out, looking in the literature, modafinil, with people who have ADHD, the side effect profile is several times the background risk.
No kidding.
So if you have some attention that's soft and you're using things that aren't really suited for you, you may provoke side effects. And to me, that's exactly the wrong thing to get out of a nootropic. It should only provide long-term health. So
Right.
So we're getting now into another topic that I like, which is aging. I'm a gerontologist, and I tend to focus on aging throughout the life course, from prenatal to grave, so to speak. Are you seeing some older adults come through your programs and get something out of it? Yeah,
it's unreal. Like I think the oldest has been 65 who've made it through our 50-hour course.
Oh, wow. I'm not sure I could do that.
Yeah, and we had one guy who was 63 who did it twice. He made it 25 hours the first time, and then simply his body just said no more.
Yeah.
And then he trained some more. These guys are training hard though. It's not something you just jump into, but
right.
And these guys are on the outer edge of capacity for that age, I would say. But more and more, and the 65-year-old guy who came through, you look at him and you think 50.
Yeah.
No, right? And so I think probably 50 is the new 65 or something like that.
Let's hope.
70 is the new 50.
I'm 46, so let's hope 50 is the new.
Yeah,
or
but it takes
50.
I'm sure you've talked about this before. Longevity is self-management of the mind-body system.
Yeah.
And there will be nanobots someday that kind of help that. I'm fascinated with technology, and the prevailing wisdom right now is if you're 50 and you can hold out for 30 years, you have a good chance of extending your life for
another 30 years or so.
To buy another 30 with at least where the technology will be. But, because of my yoga background, I also have a slightly different take on longevity because I have seen, 100 and 5-year yogis and martial artists who look like they're 50.
Yeah.
And you're like, how the heck?
Yep.
Now, they've eliminated all stress from their life.
Exactly.
They meditate for 6 or 8 hours a day. They have a daily movement practice.
Yep.
They eat extraordinarily light.
Yep.
This is something that's kind of evolved with me because we have, we teach some nutrition and stuff, and people always ask me, so what are your fueling plan like?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't eat that much.
Yeah.
Right. I think my training and all the work I've done is just like my body's gotten to this point where it just knows what it needs and doesn't crave anymore.
Right.
Right. So I have an Ample in the morning now. That's a fun new product.
Yeah, I've seen those on Facebook ads and things these days.
It's basically food, whole food in a bottle.
How does it taste? I was
It's
curious.
very good,
Yeah?
actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
it's not like, chocolate cake or anything like that, but it's actually really good.
That's great.
Just add water, shake it, and you got a full meal with carbohydrates, protein, fat, all from things like macadamia nuts and really healthy kale and whatnot. So that's become my go-to for like my morning/meal, and it carries me throughout the day.
That's great.
Believe it or not. And I might have a snack in the afternoon, like an acai bowl or something like that, and then super light dinner, just some salad or something.
So you're trying to get to that extra 30, 40, 50 years of life
and I just
extension.
don't eat that much, and I do intermittent fasting, so my last meal is at 7 p.m.
Gotcha.
I don't eat again until like 10 a.m. the next day.
And of course, caloric restriction is the only documented, proven life extension that seems to work, right?
Yeah, we work with rats, and
works with rats.
seals are lab rats basically for the U.S. government.
Only about 10% of mouse and rat studies translate effectively to humans, but caloric restriction has been documented now in humans as one of the few things that we can show that activates a SIRT1 gene and causes that hormetic where you stress the body and it responds with a healing sort of response.
Is that long-term or fasting or both?
It was long-term caloric restriction. It was over a decade or more. They showed some decreased age markers, decreased inflammatory cytokines, lengthened telomeres, things like that.
I think the reality is that we eat more than we need to simply because of our culture and the availability of food. And that's just something that Ben talks about, Ben Greenfield and my friend Rob Wolf, is that the bioavailability of food and the tastiness of it, we're wired to want that.
Well, it was rare, 20,000 years ago that we had rich sources of free carbohydrates that gave us energy at will. We had to sort of, exert to get carbohydrates.
Right.
And now we'd walk into Whole Foods and even a good supermarket, you can walk out with horrible...
Not much exertion to
do very little.
To
fighting through all the soccer moms in LA maybe in Whole Foods, but beyond that, it's not too bad.
Yeah, so caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, making sure that sleep is really sound, all these things. Of course, what you eat is important as well. So I'm more ketogenic. I kind of flow between ketogenesis and glycolytic.
Avoid spiking that insulin, basically.
Right, exactly. And then daily training, daily movement. If there's, I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't move my body in some capacity. I'm not always doing some hardcore thing. So hardcore is 4 times a week. And then the rest of the time is yoga, martial movements, paddling. I've got an outrigger canoe or a long walk on the beach with my wife, and every one of these training sessions is integrative. And so I'm looking at it like I talked about earlier from the standpoint, I'm not just getting out, I'm actually I'm stacking, I'm stacking benefits.
That's great.
And then of course the main thing is
the mind,
youthful mind.
Yeah.
So I there's times where, because I don't focus on it, where I forget how old I am.
How old are you, Mark? I might ask.
I forgot. 50, I'm 53.
Okay, that's great.
But I'm 53 years old, and I can routinely smack down the 18 or 19-year-old SEAL candidates who come to SEAL.
Reminded me, I did Aikido for many years, and one of the teachers, Kanai Sensei, was this little old Japanese man who was in his late 70s. And he had a stroke, and so he had some spasticity. His balance was off. He would come in and teach for a 2-day conference or something, and he'd kind of stagger up to the mat. And then the moment he put his hands on somebody, he's flying through the air gracefully, and all that learning that 50, 60, 70 years of his life over learning all these movement, even with impairments, he still had a lot of resilience. And so it's not like we aren't going to get brain injuries or some age-related cognitive decline or some loss of muscle mass or decrease of bone density as we get old. But to some extent, we can offset those things. It sounds like a lot of the things you're doing would shore up and
I think so. I mean, some of the key things, because it's such a fascinating subject for me as well as probably the listeners, I believe that resistance training is really important. If you have muscular mass, you want to maintain that.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that mass it means blood flow, nutrients, energy, right? So that's one, is being able to, doesn't matter whether you're doing a 400-pound deadlift, but just move some weight, several times a week. Another is energy management, pranayama. Okay. So learning to work with the breath as life force instead of as just oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Okay. Say more about that.
Okay. So the way that I do this and the way that I was taught is to add intention and visualization. And so that, because every time we breathe, you're drawing in life force, right? So it's like the electricity in the air, right? We can breathe poorly and without awareness, and that life force will still come in, but it's not going to come in a rich, kind of energizing manner. Or we can take time to like slow down and literally try to connect like a Tai Chi master with the energy, and then to imagine, to visualize, and to see it coming into your body and stimulating through the the nadis and your energetic system, all your chakras and or energy centers, and moving out throughout your body. So this is a visualization practice that I do, and what it looks like is I'll inhale and I'll see like a white light kind of coming in through the crown of my head and then heading down my spine and then flooding my entire body, right? And then as I exhale, it kind of collapses to like this orange-ish light, and then it heads back up, and then that's like exhaling toxins or exhaling stress. And you combine this with a mantra, right? Okay. So
this is a pretty strong mindfulness practice.
Very much well, it would be more of a concentration practice where I'm using an internal dialogue, anchor, as well as the visualization.
A samatha kind of approach.
So it's an integrative approach. Breath, mantra, visualization. 3 things going on. Right?
And with that structured breathing, you're probably getting some vagal tone activation, kind of like doing your own HRV without devices, I would expect.
Absolutely, because you're breathing diaphragmatically, which is going to trigger the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system, so you're getting all that. So it's very calming. So 5 minutes of this breath is extraordinary, because you begin to feel with every breath like this tingling and this rush of energy coming in. And this is, I found this for unbelievable benefit for recovering quickly from workouts or, a long workout, and for just energizing myself, during the day when I'm feeling fatigued.
And these are one of the things you teach in these programs, Unbeatable Mind.
Yeah.
Is this in your book, this breathwork program?
No, I might put it in my new book. This is something that I've just been toying with and playing with the last 5 years. I think it's like a holy grail for youth. You think about what were these yogis doing every day in their meditation. They're not just off in the void. They might be for periods of time, but a lot of it is charging their body with energy.
I have
drawing energy in.
Yeah.
Right? I remember one thing I'll say about this.
Sure.
I read recently the guy who founded the not rebreathing network, but rebirthing.
Yeah. The overbreath.
Rebirthing network. I forget the guy's name at the top of my head. He wrote it like one of these really weird little books that he's talking about immortality. Because there is this notion out there that there are deathless yogis.
Sure, I'm familiar with the concept.
I've read about him. I've never met any, but he made it his mission to go find some of these people, and he claims that he's met like 4 or 5 of these guys. And one of the guys he met in India, the guy wouldn't meet with him. He literally was like 50 feet away, and so the guy who wrote the book just asked him, said, how do you, what is your main practice? And he goes, well, I avoid other humans.
The case in point here.
See that. It's like, well, that probably would work. You think how negative humans are. And they're all vampires and sucking your energy.
That's interesting.
Anyway, so I guess one way to do it is to drop out of society and go be a monk in a cave, but I don't recommend that for most people.
Right. I mean, it's not sustainable for most folks. You have to do things like pay bills and, eat and things like that. So unfortunately, not everyone can be the spiritual guru full time.
Right. And it'd be interesting to see, and I think, a lot of people think with technology that we're going to get that, right? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see whether the human being, I'm not sure what the heck that would mean for human culture if all of a sudden we live for 500 or 1,000 years.
It'd
just be a bizarre experiment.
I bet one thing it would do would eliminate language barriers. I'm of the opinion that if we all were all understandable to each other,
Right.
conflict would be much less.
I think so too.
You referred to earlier this nationalism, this in-group versus out-group identification. There's real reasons for that from an evolutionary perspective, protect your genes against, unlike your genes. But now in a modern culture, we don't really have to fight for survival of our genes the same way.
Right.
And so I think it's time to, put the Tower of Babel back together and eliminate and remove the communication barriers. I think that'll remove a lot of the nationalism, a lot of the over-attachment
Google will create a universal translator, and you just pop this thing, either you swallow it or,
That's right.
And every word that comes out of your mouth will be understood.
Yeah, did you hear their translator? It's an algorithm, it's an AI, and they told it a few months ago to come up with a new way of translating, and without telling anyone, it created another language. It created a lingua franca that's intermediate with all of the languages it's exposed to on the planet.
Really?
So it created this almost like an Esperanto.
Like a world language.
Yeah. And it's the scaffolding layer between all other languages. So a few months ago, suddenly Google Translate went from being okay accurate to amazingly accurate. It's not phrase-based translation, it's meaning-based translation. And they looked at how it did it. It had created this entire other translation layer and another language, a Google language that the machine created that was intermediate between all the concepts and words it was being exposed to.
That is fascinating.
So things like that are starting to emerge. I mean, this, of course, is probably Kurzweil's singularity, at least the more reasonable claims on that. I'm not sure I believe all the deep claims he's making these days. But things like that are happening. So you and I are, just south, just north of 50. If we can manage another 30, 40 years,
we'll get a
little bit longer. So
yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm reading Kurzweil's book right now, How to Make a Mind. Mm-hmm. And then there's the next one on my docket is called The Emotional Machine, or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact title. But the idea is that there's also an AI movement to create an emotional experience. Yeah. And so that was always been like, so emotions, the machines seem to be devoid of emotion, but if AI can, learn to feel, now we're getting somewhere interesting. But my idea is that, of course, a lot of people will agree with this, and then the hard scientists will poo-poo it, is that, the mind is not the brain. And so the AI movement to just recreate the brain or the function of the brain is missing the point. Sure. The mind as consciousness is something different. The brain is just the organ that's the meaning maker.
It scaffolds it.
It scaffolds it or provides the structure so that we can translate, like Google Translator, what's going on. Our consciousness isn't just hanging out, but able to have a human experience. That's what the brain does. Yep. But, what Ray says is, no, that's not true. Consciousness is just more complexity. Deeper pattern recognition and complexity, and that there's a point where that complexity gets expansive enough and interconnected enough that it becomes self-aware. Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I sort of believe Kurzweil in that way. I am a bit of a reductionist like he is. Although I do think the best thing that Kurzweil has given us is still the Kurzweil organ. In the 70s and 80s, we would not have music in this modern world without Kurzweil giving us the organ. So I still think that's
he also invented voice recognition software.
Did he?
Yeah.
Interesting. So he's
a pretty sharp guy.
Crazy history considering that we know him as the exponent guy these days. Right. So that's wonderful. So Mark, what else are you doing? What else are you bringing out into the world? What other projects are you getting into that you want to tell folks about?
A couple exciting ones. One is, the way I talked about SealFit, it sounds like, holy shit, that's like, the double PhD in functional fitness. And it is. So, and it was very hard to scale our business like that. Sure. We can train maybe a few thousand people a year in person. So we've created something called SealFit Bootcamp, which is kind of the Get Started Here program. And it will, we filmed it. For the first time, we actually filmed me leading and actually a couple of my coaches leading, a small group, I think 3, in a studio setting, sort of like P90X.
Right.
But it's SealFit, and we layer all the mental training, those 4 big skills, we layer it through it, and we're doing, yoga at the end of it, and breath control, and practicing mental, dialogue and visualization all through the physical training. And the training is very simple but hard. Meaning anybody can do it if you're willing to work hard. Yep. So like P90X, there were millions of people did it. What I loved about those programs is that Beachbody's kind of proved that hard exercise actually sells. Sure. So it kind of paved the way for us. So we're launching that April 15th.
Great.
And I'm really excited about that because it's going to allow us to help a lot more people get functionally fit and mentally tough. And then if they love it, then they can come into the lifestyle of SEAL Fit and maybe attend one of our events like the 20X and whatnot. The other thing is I'm writing a new book. Now, this book is kind of writing me.
Okay.
And it's the next
I hear that's the right kind of book to write.
Yeah, this is the next generation of the Unbeatable Mind philosophy. And it's going to take me probably the rest of this year to get it done. And conversations like this and all the other people that I've had are starting to really have an impact. And so the book is broken into 5, and this will become our next a training program as well. So the evolution of the training is broken into 5 major sections. And I title them Wake Up, Grow Up, Clear Up, Open Up, and Show Up.
Okay. Sounds great.
It's going to be cool. I won't go into all the details, but each one of those sections is like a mini training program in and of itself, right? Waking up is like exposing yourself to the capacity for your own potential. Growing up is essentially the tools that we've been talking about. How do you do integrative training to expand your capacity, use your whole mind? Clearing up is the part where most people need to spend a lot of time. That's the emotional work, getting in touch with the emotion, especially men, clearing up past emotional baggage, releasing all the energy of regret and shame and anger and all the stuff that, stops.
Developing some resiliency.
Developing emotional resiliency through self-awareness and social awareness. And that one is a doozy because most people might be, super cognitive and get all that stuff, but then they keep torpedoing.
Yeah.
Not most people, but a lot of people will agree with me. Even myself, this is born on my own experience. I was top Navy SEAL in my class and everything, and still, as a leader, I would torpedo myself with some bullshit emotional baggage from my youth. So that's clearing up. Opening up is learning to use the intuition. I call it the SEAL belly, the Buddha heart, and the yogi mind.
Okay.
So instinct, intuition, and insight. How do we tap into that? It's part of the whole. So you see, we're getting into that whole mind. First cognition, and then emotion, and then intuition, and then spirit, and then the last section is showing up. Is how do I take this new me that's upgraded me, that's able to deal in this VUCA world as a leader? How do I build a team around that and have the team experience this same sort of accelerated development and growth? And just go out and kick ass and take names, but for the benefit of humanity.
Right.
Not just for my own pocketbook or for my own ego.
That sounds great. Well, Mark, it's been wonderful having you here. A lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah.
I'm sure our listeners are furiously Googling the internet right now, trying to figure out all the different things we've touched on. Thanks so much for showing up and coming on the show today. Where can our listeners track you down and find out more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I guess if you type my name into Google,
Mark Divine,
Divine, then SEAL Fit will show up.
Okay.
So, and unbeatablemind.com will show up. And of course, Facebook, we have a Facebook thing and, all that kind of stuff. If what we talked about was interesting, my leadership book, The Way of the SEAL, is really, people find that to be really useful for thinking and leading like an elite Navy SEAL.
Sure.
And my philosophy of living and a lot of the training we talked about is in the book Unbeatable Mind. Both those are available at Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
All right, folks, so check out Mark's books. Come be a near-fit SEAL in Southern California. Check out the online training programs and all the books Mark is pumping out throughout the rest of the year. So again, thanks so much, Mark. And folks, this has been another episode of Head First with Dr. Hill. Take care of your brains, and we'll see you soon.